can disadvantage voters from voting.
Holly Walker.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. I'm very pleased that this debate was carried over until today so that I can have a chance to make a substantive contribution. To reinforce the contribution of my colleague Materia Ture when this debate started last week, and I want to thank the Honourable Marion Street for her contribution just now in defence of my supplementary order paper number 420, reinstating the clauses of the bill deleted by the Select Committee related to the use of the Easy Vote card. There's three key things I want to say here, Mr Chairman. The first is that the Green Party is generally in support of the provisions in this bill, and we have undertaken over many years, and including in this process, to work constructively towards sensible modernisation of our electoral law, and to do so wherever possible by consensus. Now, Mr Chairman, I sat on the Justice and Electoral Committee that undertook the review, the inquiry into the 2011 general election, which gave rise to the process that has become this electoral amendment bill currently before the House. Now, that committee undertook an inquiry into the election. It heard from a range of submitters about all aspects of the 2011 general election, and by consensus, we worked on that committee to come up with a number of recommendations to put to the government where we thought there needed to be changes in time for this year's 2014 general election. And one of those changes that we recommended after hearing evidence from the Electoral Commission was that the Easy Vote card should be allowed to be used as a confirmation that a voter has cast their vote. That was recommended to us by the Electoral Commission. They outlined to us how that would streamline their processes on polling day, how that would speed up the process for their staff, and how it would make for a smoother and better experience for voters. And the Select Committee, by consensus, adopted that recommendation when we were hearing evidence into the inquiry. And therefore, Mr Speaker, the government responded to those recommendations amongst many other things in this bill which we support. One of the recommendations was that that be written into law, and that was what was in the first draft of this bill that we passed in this House at first reading. That was then referred back to the same Select Committee to consider the details of the bill itself. Now, unfortunately, Mr Chair, I was on parental leave while the Select Committee considered this bill. And if I had been here, I think I would have argued very strongly against the Select Committee's decision to delete now the clauses relating to the Easy Vote card. Now, I wasn't present for those discussions, so I can't speak specifically to the concerns raised, but my understanding, and certainly it's reflected in the Select Committee's report, where it says that members were concerned about electoral fraud. And I think I have a quote here. We consider that the proposed provision for a new process known operationally as Easy Vote Express would in effect lower the threshold for casting a vote, increasing the potential for fraud and harming the integrity of the voting process. Now, what I think has happened is some very well-intentioned members of that Select Committee have, under a misapprehension, become concerned that the provisions in this bill and in my SOP, that my SOP reinstates, would in effect make it more prolific to use the Easy Vote card, would make it easier to access one or easier to use it. I'm not sure exactly what the concern, where it stems from, but there seems to be a concern that somehow it would make it easier for people to pretend to be someone they were not when they go to cast their vote, and that might increase the risk of electoral fraud. Now, that is a legitimate concern, and it's a concern that I understand and I share. Certainly we should be concerned to minimise the instances of electoral fraud wherever possible. But, Mr Chair, that concern has, in my view, manifested itself in a very harmful and unhelpful mechanism whereby the Select Committee seems to have agreed to delete all of these clauses related to the Easy Vote card. And I would put it to the House and to the Minister that we're really throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. If we go back to first principles, we look at what an Easy Vote card is and what it's for. It simply is a card that contains the name, address of the voter, and the page number and line in the electoral roll where their name can be found. It makes it easier for the staff at the polling place to find them on the electoral roll and issue their ballot paper more quickly. It's not an ID card. It's no different in any mechanical sense from turning up at the polling booth with no ID at all and simply saying your name and your address. It just makes it quicker and easier for the polling booth staff to look up your name. Mr. Chair.
Holly Walker.
It doesn't make it any easier to record a fraudulent vote. For example, if somebody took it upon themselves that they wanted to vote in someone else's name, they could go along to any polling place and do that by giving that person's name and address. There would be no difference whether they had their Easy Vote card in their hand or not. The Easy Vote card does neither increase nor decreases the risk of electoral fraud taking place, and I think that's something that's really important that this House understands when considering the amendments on the floor today. Because I think the Select Committee has been labouring under a misapprehension and has got it wrong here. And as a consequence, we are throwing out the baby with the bathwater. We are throwing out the ability for the Electoral Commission to make a change that would make it much easier for them to run things on election day. Now, what they would like to see is not a mass expansion of the use of the Easy Vote card. It's not making electoral fraud any easier. It's simply adding a scannable code to the Easy Vote card that would allow Electoral Commission staff to scan the card after the voter has handed it in as a record that that voter has voted. In fact, it would make it easier to catch out instances of fraud, because instead of waiting until the electoral roll could be manually collated and have people's names drawn off with a ruler, it would electronically record whether someone had voted yet or not. So if someone attempted to vote twice or someone else attempted to vote in their name, it would show up much more quickly under the proposals before the House than under the status quo. So the Electoral Commission had a very sensible idea to have scannable cards to collate the roll electronically, to make it much easier to tell if someone's voted twice and to make it happen much more quickly. And the Select Committee's essentially thrown that out. Now, as Marion Street pointed out in her contribution to the House just now, the fact that the number of parties in the House have now identified this as a problem and are suggesting reinstating these clauses should not be controversial for the Minister, because all we are seeking to do is reinstate exactly what she initially proposed in the bill. The Select Committee thought about it, they made a recommendation. A number of parties in the House now consider that recommendation to be wrong and are asking that we simply revert to what the Minister had in the bill in the first place. It shouldn't be controversial for the government to adopt the changes that a number of the SOPs on the floor of the House are recommending. And I really implore the Minister and the government members to take this seriously and listen and let common sense prevail, because actually we could have consensus across the House, as it is always best to do on electoral matters, if they were willing to return to the bill as originally drafted. And I think that would be a significant improvement on what would pass if we allowed the bill to pass without these amendments. Mr. Chair, the Electoral Commission was a long way down the path of their planning for the 2014 election, and they were planning that election on the basis that they would be able to use the Easy Vote card with a scannable code on it to electronically collate the roll. And if we don't allow them to do that, I put it to the House that that is a missed opportunity to streamline electoral processes, and it's based on a misapprehension, an understandable fear about electoral fraud, but fundamentally a misapprehension, because there's nothing in the proposal that would make it any different from a user perspective to use the Easy Vote card to cast the vote. And it wouldn't change that. It wouldn't change the risk of electoral fraud one bit. So all we're doing is throwing out what would essentially be really useful streamlined mechanism for the Electoral Commission based on an unfounded fear about electoral fraud. And I think that would be a real shame. So I really implore members across the House, especially government members and especially the Minister and the Chair, to consider this seriously and consider reverting to the bill as originally drafted, which is what my SOP would achieve. Mr. Chair, the other concern we have is around the inadvertent disenfranchisement of disabled voters by another change that was made by the Select Committee. These are the changes referred to both by Marion Street in her SOP and my colleague Mojo Mathers. And that is the idea of asking a voter to verbally confirm their identity at the polling booth. Now, this again was a late addition to the Select Committee, and it was born out of concerns about electoral fraud, but it appears that very little consideration has been given to the impact that this would have on voters with speech impediments, with hearing impediments, and voters for whom English is a second language. And we consider that for many people, it would make it difficult or impossible for them to comply with the new requirement. And the flippant response that seems to have been given, written into the bill, is that they can confirm their identity with a gesture if they're not able to do it verbally. I put it to the House, Mr Chairman, that is very disrespectful for people in that position.
Mr Chairman.
Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. I would like to turn to the sections of the bill that deal with